Hey everybody, Heidi Harris here. How are you? It's been a while since I have done a video. I am really glad to be doing this again. I have some of you who have followed me understand, if you follow me on Facebook and things like that, that my mother passed away, and so I was very busy dealing with that. I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to cry, so it's all good. But I'm back at it, doing the things that God put me here to do. I am thrilled today to bring on the podcast, video cast, all that stuff, Rick Fletcher, who is a former police captain with Metro. All right, so this guy knows where all the bodies are buried. So happy to have him. Done a lot of details and over the course of his career, which we will be talking about in subsequent podcasts also. He was an internal affairs lieutenant, spent time in patrol, traffic, academy staff. He was a range sergeant, police captain, and commander of the honor guard, and it goes on and on and on. So I am thrilled to have you today, Rick. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Heidi, and my condolences to you and your family.
Yeah, well, we've
I've
all
been
been
there,
through it.
but moms are moms, right? We're always going to miss them.
They are, and you know what? As you and I talked about before we started this, we don't grieve as those who have no hope. I know
That's
she's with
correct.
Jesus, and I have that comfort, and I know that you understand that as a Christian yourself. The
Yes.
reason I invited you to be here today, for the first time you'll be on, of many I'm hoping, is you have an organization called Protection with Grace. And I became aware of you a little while ago when I was kind of, like I said, busy with the other stuff that I was dealing with. But I got a hold of your book. It's called Protection with Grace. People can get this on Amazon. Keep Your House of Worship Safe is the subtitle, written by you, of course. And it's really important because here we look at the situation that just happened in Michigan last couple of days at church. And as soon as that happened, I thought of you. And I thought, I've got to just get him on now because this is really important. Churches, it's interesting how people in houses of worship will say, well, yeah, but, it's a house of worship. We're supposed to be safe there. We're not supposed to have guns there. We're not supposed to think like that. Talk a little bit about how to make Christians or people of any faith understand how important it is to be prepared. Because even Nehemiah talks about building the wall and holding a knife in one hand, right? This is really important. Talk a little bit about that.
It is important. And, yesterday's tragedy was, there's so many different angles that we could talk about. But for starters, I firmly believe that people of any religion or belief have a right for peaceful worship. I truly believe that. I run security at my little church, and I take that very serious. But like you just alluded to, it doesn't mean that we just we close our eyes. When I wrote my book, Heidi, a lot of national research went out to it. It took 3 years to write this book, right? A lot of
Yeah.
the responses I got
Write
back
them yourself. They take time when you write books yourself. I get it.
yes. One of the questions I asked a lot of questions about security, but I immediately noticed a lot of apathy. That, no, we're just a small church. A couple of responses came back and said, well, we believe in Jesus. Well, so do I.
Wow.
Absolutely I believe in Jesus as my Savior. It doesn't mean that we have to stop protecting the flock, the congregation, the staff, the volunteers, the babies.
Right.
That's why I wrote this book, because the apathy was it just filled that cup to the brim, and it's kind of disheartening to hear that, where people are like, no, we pray. Well, you should pray for everything.
Absolutely.
But why not take charge of security as well?
Right. And you did a survey, which was interesting, about a lot of houses of worship and the attitudes Christians had about it. And that's probably what you're talking about. You're talking about how surprised you were at the apathy. And people don't understand it. I think the Jews get this better than other people. I used to live near a Jewish school in town, and there was a guy standing on the meeting with a huge gun every day when they picked up the kids from school. I mean, there was no messing around. The Jews, I think, understand this better, and we're not talking about what happened at that church because we don't know. We know the guy drove his car in, shot a bunch of people, set fire to the church, which is horrendous. We don't know if they had security in place, what their policies were. Do you know anything about that? I've not heard anything that's accurate that I can count on about what their policies might have been at that church.
No, not the policies. The LDS Church does great things, obviously, but I know, you read the comments, you read the news. They had a no gun policy, which if you look at Michigan law, they don't really say you can't have guns. They consider it a private property, which it is. Therefore, let the owner decide. So whether they had guns or not, I'm not sure, but I think we look at the fact that that shooter was able to engage at will until the cops showed up.
That's the
And
point that I made. Let's stop there for a second. That's the point that I made today on Facebook. I said this, now, once again, based on early reports, and a lot of times we don't know for sure, but from the time they called 911 until the time this guy was neutralized, it was 8 minutes.
right.
And I, the old adage about how when seconds count, cops are minutes away. I mean, I cannot believe this guy had 8 minutes to do whatever he wanted to do. And I don't know what the people did. And I'm not saying they were all standing around doing nothing. But my gosh, I can tell you that my church, you're not going to get a second shot off in my church. You're
Right.
just not. And so I don't understand how these kinds of things happen. I just don't. And once again, not being there, but we're just trying to prevent these things from happening in the future is the goal of this conversation today.
And thank you. So if I may, I think I know how it happened.
Please.
We talked about apathy. One of the questions I asked in my national survey that's listed in the book was, have you ever watched as a congregation or in Bible study groups the run, hide, fight videos produced by the FBI that specifically talks about active shooters? We want people to run, of course. If you can hide, great. But if you can't do any of that, you should be attacking. And listen, I'm not talking about a soft attack. I'm talking about a full out, I'm protecting the babies, I'm protecting grandma, I'm protecting everybody type attack. The problem, Heidi, is that probably 70% of the respondents said they've never shown the run, hide, fight video. They've never talked about what if somebody comes through that door with a rifle? Or my church, a guy walked in with a machete one day and I'm like, nope, you're out of here. Right?
Wow.
So you have to address those things immediately. And from the news reports, we do see that people were shielding the babies,
I'm sure.
which is amazing. But I'm thinking, well, where's the attack? It's one guy. Attack, attack, attack. And I know some people say, well, that's not Christian. Well, it actually is. If I'm protecting God's little ones and I'm doing it in a house of worship, then I think I'm going to be okay by taking a very quick and vicious attack against those trying to hurt me and others.
Yeah, there was was it Texas a couple of years ago where a guy came into the church and had a gun, and there was a person who was on the security squad, whatever they called it. He got a clean headshot all the way across the church. You remember that story?
Yep.
Unbelievable. Talk a little bit about that, because who knows how many lives that man saved by not only being bold, not only carrying a gun to church to protect the congregation, but practicing. He was a great shot. I mean, nobody wants somebody to die. We're not saying that. But if you have to do it, you have to do it. Talk a little bit about that story.
Yeah, no, I've seen that video from different angles. That was a well-coached, well-trained team. They had eyes on this guy the minute he walked in based on the long trench coat, right? In law enforcement, we talk about if something just doesn't look right, that's a clue.
The old JDLR, yes, as they say.
There you go. You've been around cops. So they identified this guy immediately, and then when he started to produce that shotgun, they engaged. Unfortunately, a security officer, a guard at the church did get killed, but they neutralized that threat. If those guys were not well trained, you probably would have seen more casualties. Which, when we talk about guns, and I've seen the comments, we got guns, that doesn't mean anything. My book and my mission is have a plan. You have to have a plan. Because if 20 guys start producing guns, who's shooting who? There has to be communication, right? And just like, think of a SWAT call out in law enforcement or military action. There's a chain of command, and that communication has to flow. We just can't have 20 different individuals acting independently. And there's people in my church that carry guns, and I'm like, watch me first. If I'm doing something, then yeah, jump in.
Right.
But let's just keep those guns holstered. And
Right.
that was a great video, and hopefully we can find it for your podcast. But it's more about
Yeah,
just having.
I'll put the link.
Yeah, church security
that's
is
good. That's
more
important
about
for people
just
to know.
having the biggest, baddest guy at the door. It's more
You know,
about who's
I'm
carrying
glad
the
you
gun.
mentioned that. Right. Once again, the book is called Protection with Grace. Is it showing up backwards on the screen? Is it? It might be.
Yeah, I can see it. Yep.
Oh, it's not backwards. Okay, it looks backwards to me. All right, Protection with Grace. We're talking about this book. You mentioned that in the book, which I thought was great. I mean, tons. I've got so many highlights in here. One of the things you mentioned is church security shouldn't just be about who's the biggest, toughest looking guy. You know, as a 25-year veteran of law enforcement, that it's not the biggest cop who necessarily gets results. Most of the time, you're going in and you're trying to defuse a situation, and your people skills, in many cases, are the most important skills you have, and your awareness of what's going on, and that a person walked in the door. And you also mentioned here, which is really important, that a lot of times somebody who's acting odd just wants someone to listen to them. So somebody may come into your church and they may just be acting weird. And the truth is, you go and you talk to them, kind of get them away from everybody else. Sometimes they just want to be heard. I thought that was interesting. I hadn't thought about that. But let's go back to the picking somebody for the church squad, whatever you want to call it, the squad, the security team, whatever. Talk about some of the things that you would look for in people who'd be willing to do that and effective at it.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I look for immediately is I don't want somebody coming up to me using church security as a proving ground to see how tough they are. I want somebody with communication skills. And like you mentioned, I want somebody who understands situational awareness. If we can see the threat coming through the door, then we should have been able to see the threat in the parking lot.
That's right.
Or are there domestics going on inside the church? You know, that Family Research Center mentioned 400 hostile acts against churches last year.
Wow.
And a lot of those were domestic related, you know, the inner workings. So
I'm glad you brought that up because that's important. I actually know somebody whose daughter was murdered by her ex or husband or whoever in a church. And I mean, it's happened before. And there have been a lot of incidents because they know you're there. If they're stalking you or whatever, you're having a divorce or whatever the situation is, they know you're going to be there on Sunday. And that's terrifying.
It's very terrifying. I want somebody who can just work through the problem, right? And if it means taking the person off to the side and asking seriously, and as a Christian, are you okay? You know, do you need medical help? Because their response is going to tell me everything. It could be like, oh, finally, somebody's listening. Or they're like, no, I'm just here to get food. Or if they get really, you know, some weird comments coming from them, then we're probably going to take that conversation outside. And, you know, my pastor gets mad at me because I'll handle things I won't tell him. I'm like, that's what security should be doing. If you don't know what's going on, that means security's working just fine.
Exactly right. That is so true. And the way, obviously, the way a person is dressed, things like that don't necessarily clue you into the fact that they might be off. You just don't know. But when somebody's not doing something appropriately, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I will do a whole video on this, but of many examples. I lived alone for a long time before I was married, and so many close calls that I had that I was paying attention and avoided.
Absolutely.
You know, one particular example, I was at the grocery store down there in Green Valley, and there was a guy in the grocery store in the back, you know, dressed nicely, you know, khaki shorts and a polo shirt, whatever. He could have gotten into a BMW or anything. And except he was walking around the back of the grocery store with his bag tied already, his grocery bag. And I went, that's weird. Nobody else has that. So I just kept my eye on him. And every aisle I would show up in, he would show up in, kind of thing. And it got to the point where when I walked out of the store, I of course kept the shopping cart between me and anybody else and I yelled at this guy I have a big mouth anyway, absolutely yelled at him calmly, not screaming, get, in, you know, a non-Christian language, away from me. You have 1 second to get away from me, very firmly. And now would I have had to take other action? I don't know. But the main thing is the guy didn't expect it. For me to do that, and he didn't think that I was on to him from the second I walked in the store. And to your point, going back into the parking lot where they park in a weird way. They get out of the car, they're looking around, they've never been there before. All those things you're looking at if you're security. And you also make a point about not just giving somebody the job of handling things in the parking lot. What does that even mean? You talk about that, and that's very important.
It seems like, you know, hey, kid, can you walk and breathe? Yes, okay, you got parking lot. No, we don't want that. I want
Right.
somebody who's going to get on the radio and tell me, hey, Rich, we got a problem coming in. This guy's driving this type of vehicle, and there's three of them, and that's what I want to know. And we see it all the time. And, you know, even my pastor's like, pick who you want, just handle it. I'm like, well, I am going to pick who I want. I mean, I'm going to do that. But again, apathy. And when I mentioned apathy early, that was from respondents. But you talk to even preachers in Vegas, they're like, yeah, we're good. We don't worry about that. I got to tell you, I think that's the wrong attitude. You can do security, Heidi, at a church, and nobody knows you have security. That's how it should be run, right?
Isn't that
Most
the idea?
churches,
Because let me stop you for a second there. Do you think you should talk a little bit about whether people should be uniformed or not, and all that? And once again, I want people to buy your book on Amazon. They should, and if
Thank
you
you.
buy it, if you're a pastor, and if you're not, if you're a congregant, buy it and give it to your pastor. But you talk about whether or not people should be in uniform security. And I've seen some churches. I went to one the other day that I go to another one regularly, but I went to different churches because my pastor was on vacation. And there's visible security, but that's just the visible group that you see. That's not everybody. Just like the casinos, some casinos in Vegas have visible security, and a lot of them have guys talking to their lapels, just wearing a suit. You don't know, right? So talk a little bit about that, because it seems to me multiple levels are important with a church situation.
you look at the really big churches or mosques or synagogues or Sikhs, whatever, they have different levels. They have uniform. They hire the off-duty cops. Perfect. You know, they have weapon detection systems. Perfect. A small church like mine can't afford that. So I told my pastor, I'm like, I'm not wearing a uniform. I'm not wearing a shirt that says security. I just want to blend in. That's all I want to do, because I still have to get fed too, right? The word. So I still have to pay attention to that. But if you can afford uniform security, I say go for it. I'm seriously. But we have to put them in positions as not to scare the members, and more importantly, not to scare the visitors coming in.
Yeah, because some
it
people are
shouldn't-
put off by that. I'm not. I went to this church and I was happy to see it, especially in light of what's going on today.
Yep.
But some people are put off by, in a church, you got a guy with a gun and a vest in a church. And so, you don't want, especially people who are new believers, they might not understand how important that is. And so you don't want to scare them off and think this is a crazy church.
Yeah. Well, even in my church, I don't allow open carry, which is legal in Nevada, right?
Right.
I tell them that gun's going to be hidden or you're leaving. That's the way it's going to be, because I don't want to scare the grandmas and the babies. And like you said, the first time visitor that really wants to take that step in with Jesus, I don't want to scare them off. So there's you won't see any open guns in the church that I attend. Now, I know some people are different, and you know what? Good for them. It really is a personal decision how the pastor or the clergy wants to run their churches.
Right. I don't believe that open carry should be illegal, but I also think it's kind of dumb a lot of times, because that's the first guy who gets picked off. You know, if somebody comes in, right, that's the guy they take aim at. That you're the one with a gun. There may be 20 others. They don't know about them, but they know about you. To me, it's like, ha ha, look at me. I mean, that's how maybe I'm wrong. You're laughing.
I am, because I think you broke into my house and stole my notes from my weapons class. That's exactly what I talk about.
Oh, that's
the guy
funny.
that walked around Albertsons with an open carry, he's the first one to get shot.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what happened. So it doesn't make sense to me at all that people do that. So now when you go out and talk to churches about it, you said there's a lot of apathy, a lot of why should we do this? We pray, and you talk a lot about how to do it correctly. And you talk about some of the legal implications of doing things and people putting their hands on others in a situation like that. In other words, when to call the police, when to physically restrain somebody. You're not big on that unless it's very necessary, things like that. You break all that down. What's been the reaction to your book when you show this to people and say, look, I got 25 years law enforcement. I've been researching this for years. This should make sense to anybody.
Well, I don't think they know to take the first step. I think that's a problem. The first step is always communication with the congregation. That's you can do that without scaring your members. And if you put it in a perspective of, we're here to protect the babies and the grandparents. That's who we want to protect. You can actually have a very viable and living security team, and nobody knows it. but it's just about communication. So how do we communicate? We don't want to spend time at the pulpit doing that. It should be small groups. It should be at the buffets, that churches have, or an event, or I don't like emails because nobody reads emails, honestly. But it's just, they got to communicate that we have security and here's what's going to happen. Think about it. You buy a $20,000 sound system and then it's stolen. And nobody told them to write down the serial numbers or put cameras up. I don't think a small church can afford $20,000 loss. So that's what I talk about. Security is not always about stopping the bad guy. It could be grandma falls off the curb and gets a compound fracture. What are we going to do? The domestic that we talked about. What are you leaving in your car in the parking lot during church service that's bringing the bad guys to the parking lot?
Right.
What are we doing?
Boy, that's a huge point.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that at the holiday season. But you know what's really funny? Let me tell you about apathy. And I'm sorry I'm stuck on that. But when I did all this research and people were sending me emails back, a lot of them were from personal email addresses. And these were leaders in the churches. And that's why I wrote that thing in the book about that's dumb. Why would I talk to Heidi and somebody else about a church member knowing that this third person has a personal email address? We shouldn't have that. See, that's what the book is all about, protections on all levels.
Okay, so back up. I want to talk about that. So why shouldn't they email you from a personal email? It should be more from a church email, or what do you?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Because if all of a sudden I leave and I've been using my personal email address, I take all that data with me.
Oh, right. As far as who you're talking to and things like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, I know what people are going to say. I know what you're listening are going to say, well, we could just forward it to ourselves. Yeah, that's probably true, but you got to have a church. If you're doing church business, you got to have a church ID or an email address. You have to. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make
very
sense.
Important. Another thing you mentioned that I think is important too is a lot of times people don't know the address of the church. I hadn't thought about that. If it's a small church, like I have a church, our church is in a house, okay? It's an actual house. It's not a very big church. And you'd know my pastor, and I'll mention his name after we're done with this. That's why you won't get a second shot off. But anyway, when you're in a storefront church or something like that, I mean, people need to know the address. So if someone calls the cops, oh, well, I don't know. It's in the shopping center down here. We're just new, and we have 20 people, and I don't know what's the suite number. Anybody know? I mean, that's how it could go down, right?
100%. Most people never are involved in a critical incident, so they don't know what to do. I know my security team knows the address, and we're in a little strip mall
Right.
church, so they know the address. And then, the book even talks about what to do when the cops show up. How to act, how to interact with them so you don't get hurt in the process.
That's important because you don't want to be walking out of a church with a gun in your hand when the cops show up. That's I remember I called about a prowler when I was in my 20s back in 1922, and when Metro, they kept me on the phone until the cops showed up. And she's like, "Do you have a gun?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Put the gun down." Mm-hmm. The police came. My dog was going crazy, and all that. I was just so terrified. It's a long, boring story, but God bless them. They got in there quickly. Another thing you mentioned that I had not considered, that churches should consider, is the idea of partnering with first responders. Talk a little bit about doing that effectively. That is a big deal, so they can possibly know the layout of your church, know who's there. I mean, I never thought about that. Talk about that.
So, obviously my history with Las Vegas Metro, we interacted with a lot of houses of worship of all faiths. And sometimes we would ask, hey, can we train here? See, cops are always looking for a place to train, like building searches, right? Mm. Well, think about it. The cops are on property. They know your layout now of the building.
Big deal.
And so if something were to happen, they know exactly where to go. But you also get cops start coming to church too, and that's just as important, right?
That's
it's
you bring
amazing.
Food, they'll come here. Cops and firefighters will show up, and radio people. Wherever there's
That's
food,
right.
They'll show up. That's all you have to say.
I admit I think I was the most surprised at this question about interacting with local first responders. The majority of people said no. And
What?
that's not right. They should be. Invite them to your events, right? Invite them when you guys have a buffet. Invite them when you have whatever type of celebration, right? Just invite them and then offer, hey, you guys want to come in on a Saturday and do a quick building search training? Or
Right.
you guys want to come in and use us as volunteers for an active shooter training scenario, right? I mean,
Oh,
there's
that'd be
just,
great. Yeah.
you just have to interact. I mean, I haven't heard the timeline for Michigan yet, from the time 911 called until the cops arrived. Some people say 30 seconds, other people say 8 minutes. I really don't know. But
Yeah.
the
Well,
question I have
that,
is,
yeah, I heard the cops were there in 30 seconds, but then he wasn't neutralized for 8 minutes. Once again, we don't know for sure, but that's a
that's
heck of a
correct.
lag time. If they're there in 30 seconds and there's 7.5 minutes where this guy did whatever he wanted to before
Yep.
he was subdued, is a pretty big deal. If that's the correct timeline.
Yep. Hey, invite the cops, invite the firefighters. And, cops and firefighters, we always jokingly joke with each other, but invite them. Bring them to church. You never know. They might start bringing their families.
Remember the time in Vegas years ago when a fire truck got stuck in a flood and
I
Metro
remember.
had to come across?
I might have
Metro
a
had to
picture of
come
that.
so it was so good because the cops and firefighters are always one upping each other. It was hilarious that Metro had to come in and pluck these guys off the top of their fire truck. That's good
I'll
stuff.
say this on a side note: the relationship between firefighters and cops in Southern Nevada is really good.
Yeah,
We know the horror stories elsewhere, but in Southern Nevada, it's really good. And yeah, we definitely bust on one another.
absolutely. And you also mentioned the idea of having the fire department come bring a truck. I mean, kids love that stuff. They love the lights. They love the truck. They're all excited about that. And I think probably a lot of these first responders would be happy to show up if the invitation was extended. They're
Yes,
happy to get involved in their community. We're the people they're protecting. They're happy to come and get to know us, right? They just need to be
yes,
asked.
absolutely. Most of the time, when churches see firefighters, it's during a fire inspection. Well, hey, bring them out and feed them. Let them have fun with the kids and show off the truck. And
Yeah.
but then think about what I said earlier. That firefighter might go home and say, "Man, I just found a really cool church. Maybe
Right.
we should attend."
That
But
is very good. Yeah.
and from my perspective, obviously as a cop, retired cop, now we get kids interacting with police. That's not part of a car stop or a crime scene.
Right.
Now
That's
we
a
start building
win-win.
those relations. Yep.
Absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about vicarious liability. That is something I think is really important, and it goes along with the training of the people at the church. We're not looking for somebody who's wannabe ranger or whatever, who's never actually, you want somebody who's in it for the right reasons, right? So talk about vicarious liability and how important that is for churches.
Well, yeah. I mean, if not every church is going to have a 100% foolproof plan, we know that. You're going to get sued one way or the other. Are you going to get sued for not doing anything, or are you going to get sued because you tried to help? You
Right.
know what I mean? I mean, does your first aid kit even have an anti-choking mechanism for little kids? Right? Have you covered the outlets in the nursery so the kids don't put little toys in there? Right?
Right.
Do you have a med kit in case somebody does slip on the floor and crack their head or shatter their arm? And do you have any type of training to help until the first responders get there? Right? Vicarious liability. You're in charge. The pastor, the preacher, the rabbi, whomever, they're in charge. They have to take protection. They have to take steps to protect the flock.
Right.
Again, you can't do it 100%, but it's better to do something than nothing. And that's that
Yeah.
vicarious liability.
Yeah, because all of this, this all goes back to communication and discussing with your congregation, what would happen if my pastor's facing the door. I know some pastors are not. Mine is facing the front door. He'd be the first one to see if there was somebody who walked in who it looked a little shady, and he would make sure. And then, like I said, there's several other cops in our very tiny church, and so they're on alert if something. We did have a guy come in a couple times who everybody was watching him. He was a homeless guy who basically didn't care about Jesus. He just knew when to show up for free coffee and when to plug in his electronic devices. That's
Yep.
really what it came down. That's what he came into several weeks in a row, right on time when the church opened. You're welcome in, but after a while, my pastor's like, "Look, you're not here for the right reasons. We know that," kind of thing. But there were people in my church you could see, especially the cops, totally on alert when this guy was in here because JDLR, he just, and young guy too, just a little off, not doing what everybody else is doing. And that's what you have to pay attention to. And shouldn't there be, I'm sure you're going to agree with this, but there should be conversations or meetings held with the entire congregation if they want it to come. What do you look for when somebody's acting a little strange? People need to be empowered because some people just aren't intuitive like that. They don't notice, oh, the guy was, well, yeah, maybe he was doing something weird, but I really didn't want to say anything, or I wasn't really sure he was acting weird. These kind of conversations should be had too, because the security is responsibility of everybody in the church, right?
Yep. It's pretty simple in my world, Heidi. If you see something that makes you clutch your purse closer to you or bring your granddaughter closer to you, or you step in front to shield, you probably are sensing something that security needs to know about.
Right.
Because you can't have a security officer for every member of the congregation, right? There's a lot to look at. It's that classic see something, say something.
Right. And you also talk a little bit about some of the things to look for when it comes to people who may be involved in a domestic violence situation or children who may be being abused and things like that. And that is, I mean, let's face it, the teachers are not first responders, but they're mandated reporters. I don't know if church officials are, but certainly you have an option to see these children. And if you see something that, looks a little askew, and you talk about some of the signs to look for in this book, then, you certainly should let somebody know.
Yeah, we don't, as security, we're private citizens, right? And that's why I started that book by going, regardless if I was a 25-year cop or not, security is a whole different animal. And so we don't make arrests, right? But if we start seeing signs, like a little girl with bruises, or a mom who always walking in with sunglasses for a night service, these are clues. Like, okay, what's going on? And it's not security's job to handle it. It's the church leadership to handle it. If something were to happen, like, she's getting beat up by an ex-husband, well, that's when security needs to know who's the ex-husband, what does he drive, what kind of skills does he have. That's when we get involved. But your listeners need to understand that needs to go to the cops if they suspect anything. Right? Or child services, or just your leadership team at your church. Let them get involved.
It's important. I do nursery in my church, and I don't do the babies, I do the toddlers. And one of the kids one day said something about somebody giving him money. And I said, whoa, what? And so I calmly, without freaking him out, so what happened? So what did he do? I mean, and I got the answers that I was comfortable with without having to go to the parents, and it wasn't anything worse than that. But I said, you don't ever take anything from somebody without telling your parents. You know that, right? I mean, I had a little, it's like 4 years old, but I've known these kids since they're babies. But, it was important. You got to pay attention. Your antenna have to go up. What just happened here? Is something going on? Do we need to bring in the parents to have a conversation with somebody? Because you are responsible for them in the time that you have them, and they may say something in front of you that they haven't said in front of somebody else. So you got to pick up on those things.
Yep. Well, it's your duty. There's no other way to say it. You've taken on that role. It's your duty to help these kids out.
I think so. Listen, it's been great talking to you, and this is a great book. Everybody, get this and show it to your pastor. Give it to your pastor. Give a couple copies out to people. Protection with Grace. ProtectionWithGrace.com is the website. And a lot of great information. There's tons more that I didn't get to in this book because you got to buy the book. I'm not going to tell you everything in here. But it's great information. And thank you. We will talk again. Thank you so much for your 25 years of dedication to protecting the people of my fair, crazy hometown city.
Heidi, thank you, but thank you for what you do and to get the good word out, and we appreciate that. Thank you.